How do games update before internet? They didn't?
Games being released with crazy bugs only to be fixed later has become a trend in the last decade of gaming. But how exactly did games update before the internet allowed you to easily download patches?
They didn't.
Well, a lot of the time, they didn't.
Yeah.
The game
So like, there's N64 games that have like corrupted save files, and it might have only been like 2 of these games, but I know one of them at least. You could resubmit, or you could send your N64 cartridge into the company, and they would send you a second version of the game, or like third if it was already second. You get the idea. They would send you a fixed version of the game. So like that's one way.
had bugs,
But
it just
it
had
basically
bugs.
just didn't.
The most important part of a game is not the music,
Unless
not
it
the
wasn't
graphics, not the
online,
story, not
like
even the
a
gameplay.
Flash
It's
player.
the deadline. The last thing a game company wants to do is delay their game. You gotta get the game ready by November so kids will have time to ask Santa to get a copy for Christmas. However,
True.
back in the early days of gaming, Japanese games would sometimes come out years before their release in other countries. This gave developers time to add in changes in the localized versions. For example, the original Super Mario Bros. Was released in Japan on September 13th, 1985,
And it has different
and it was released
stats.
only a month afterwards in America. However, the European version of the game would not be released for home consoles until a year and a half later on May
True.
15th, 1987. The European version of the
I'm
game
freezing.
actually has some bug fixes. In the Japanese and American versions, in every single underwater level in the game, you can clip into the wall above the exit pipe as Big Mario, forcing you to stay trapped there until time runs out and you die. The European version adds a block above the pipe to stop this glitch from happening. Sometimes, though, developers wouldn't wait for an international release to update a game. They'd just quietly release an updated version
Second
of
version,
the game
yeah,
and stop
there's a
producing
lot of
copies
versions
the
to use
old
for
version.
games.
If you were one of the unfortunate saps who bought the janky version 1.0, well, that was just tough luck. You'd have to go out and buy the version 1.1 if you wanted the fixes. One of the most famous examples of this comes from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
I fucking knew it, dog. I knew it, man. People love to talk about Ocarina of Time. So the Japanese and the US versions are exactly the same, but both of them have version 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. And I mean, there's nothing. Yo, hello, Samurai. I'm doing good. I'm just watching some videos, mining in WoW. But people love talking about Ocarina of Time. There's no game-breaking glitches, but oh, really? Do you like them? Which kinds? I'm trying to get a feel for what I still want to put out there because I'm putting a lot of different stuff out there. I don't know what people want. Everyone? Oh, crap.
N64. The NTSC 1.0 version of Ocarina of Time, released in Japan and America, had several glitches, including one where you could steal the fishing rod item from the...
Yeah, you could steal the fishing rod, but like he's making this out to be that you could just go into the fishing pond, get a rod, and then go leave. That's not even the case. You have to specifically, like, you have to stand in like a certain level of water, and then throw it, and then leave. Yeah, like you can't just be like, oh, I stole the fishing rod. It's not that easy. Nobody would ever do this.
By using the hover boots as Adult Link to glide over the water
that's
and
one
then
way.
casting your line while you're hovering. Normally, you can't take the rod out of the fishing pond because if you try to leave the area, the fisherman will tell you can't leave while you have the rod equipped. However, the game doesn't check for this if Link is currently casting his fishing rod, because normally Link can't move while
this guy's talking about a glitch.
So if you cast your line while using the hover boots to fall in the water,
My first one, I mean,
to move while technically
it's a little
still
sad,
being
but
in a
it's
state
funny.
of casting. There is no benefit to having the fishing rod outside of the fishing pond, as
Yes,
the game
there
doesn't let you
is.
use it. But I mean, it's cool, I guess. In version
There is a use because you can clear your B button, dog. Come on. He left. This guy Googled what are glitches in Ocarina of Time, and he didn't even look at the uses column. My PC specs, I don't really know. I bought a pre-made computer, so I don't know what it is.
1.1, the hover boots exploit was fixed, although doing this glitch still is possible through other means. The 1.2 version of the game features some of the most prominent changes out of all of the versions. Ganondorf's blood was censored, turning it from red to puke green.
And then he's going to talk about the Fire Temple music.
Allowed the red blood to begin with, given how censor-heavy Nintendo games were back then. There was also the Fire Temple song. In the first two versions of the game,
it's like I know
Fire
all this
Temple
stuff.
Music has Islamic prayers spoken in Arabic. These vocals actually come from a sampling CD filled with vocals meant to be used in music production called Voice Spectral Volume 1 by Best Service. In version 1.2, a different song was used for the Fire Temple.
I forget what the third one is that
Now,
people always talk
you might
about.
think that many of these changes were made to Ocarina of Time after the fact, but strangely, every single version of the N64 Ocarina of Time, even the PAL versions that were released in Europe, were all made before the game first launched in Japan on November 21st,
Yeah, they just didn't get updated
1998.
because a lot of games get pre-created before they're sold. So you stock up like months and months before, so you use an older version of the game, like the non-finished still. I mean, it's just simple. What do you do? You're gonna like buy hundreds of thousands of cartridges and then just throw them away? No, you buy hundreds of thousands months in advance because you knew the game was playable, and none of these bugs even happen in a casual playthrough.
Question: if Nintendo already had the updated NTSC 1.2 version with all of the bug fixes and censored content, why did they release the outdated version 1.0? Well, one theory is money. It's possible Nintendo had already sent the version 1.0 of the games to a factory to be manufactured.
Everybody
Then
knows
shortly
this.
after
It's not
the
a
games
secret.
Were sent off, one of the game devs went back to double check the game and make sure
People have
everything was
all the
good
dates
until they
of the
realized,
builds
oh
and
shoot,
stuff.
this game's got
Not all the
bugs,
builds, but
and
people
oh,
have dates
shoot,
of different
we
builds,
probably
and you can
shouldn't
already
have
tell that
bought the
happened.
game for kids. So they ended up fixing these issues in the updated versions. Since Nintendo had already sent off the 1.0 cartridges to be made, they would have had to go through the extremely costly effort of throwing away thousands, if not millions, of cartridges they had already produced.
One thing he's not stating are things that aren't bugs that got fixed. Or maybe they're not even fixes, just game changes. So like there's another thing with the first version of the game where when you drop into a grave, you actually grab the grave. So like, when you're about to fall off a ledge, you grab the ledge. That doesn't happen in other versions. It's not really a bug fix. It's just they changed the game. There's a lot of changes.
I'm not sure if Nintendo
They
decided
changed
to
the
sell all
logo
the copies
when
of
you start the
1.0
game
and then
up.
start selling the updated versions, or if they just released all of them into the wild at once. Like I mentioned, game revisions back then were usually pretty quiet releases, but I guess this would make Ocarina of Time possibly the first game in history to have a day one patch. Ocarina of Time is
Probably
also
not.
pretty interesting, as there were plans for an expansion pack for Ocarina of Time called Ura Zelda, which would be released on the floppy disk drive add-on for the N64, the N64DD. This patch was basically a remix of the base game, increasing the difficulty and adding altered dungeons, kinda like the second quest of the original Zelda. Due to the 64DD's commercial failure, Ura Zelda ended up becoming Ocarina of Time Master Quest for the game.
There was also supposed to be bonus content. So, dog, I need more research from you,
which was
Mr.
initially released as a
Kiro.
pre-order bonus for The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker in 2002. If the developers wanted to go the extra mile, they wouldn't just use updates as a way to fix bugs, but also as a way to add new content. I introduce you to the updated re-release, aka the remix. The most iconic remixes are, of course, the new versions of the Pokemon games. Pokemon Red and Green versions were released on February 27, 1996 in Japan. About 8 months later, in celebration of the games reaching 1 million copies sold, in the October 15, 1996 issue of Koro Koro magazine, a new Pokemon game was announced. Pokemon Blue version. Included in each copy of the magazine was an application that Koro Koro readers could fill in with their information. Then they could send in the application to have a copy of Pokemon Blue mailed to them. It wouldn't be until 3 years later when Pokemon Blue was finally made available for regular retail purchase, where anyone could go into a game store and buy it. So the game was somewhat exclusive. Pokemon Blue didn't really add a lot of new content, but what it did do was drastically improve the game's visuals. The front sprites of all of the Pokemon were completely redone. Japanese Red and Green are known for having some, bad sprites. So, in Pokemon Blue, they ended up getting improved. Blue wasn't the most exciting remix, but fortunately, the next version of Gen 1 would set the standard for remixes to come. Pokemon Yellow version, Special Pikachu Edition. This game was released about 2 years after Pokemon Blue's initial announcement, and it completely changed the game. Giving you Pikachu as a starter Pokemon that could walk behind you, letting you get all 3 of the original starter Pokemon from Red and Blue, and featuring other references to the Pokemon anime like Jesse Jesse and James from Team Rocket. Releasing remixed versions of old games wasn't the only way Pokemon did updates though. Even more often than alternate versions, players got new content through promotional events.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Occasionally,
you get
Pokemon
certain
would be given
Pokemon.
away in special events run by Nintendo, Koro Magazine, or other collaborating companies. These Pokemon would usually be downloaded by connecting your game cartridge to a special distribution machine, or by connecting your system to a system that had a special distribution cartridge. For a lot of the early promotions, you actually had to send in your cartridge through the mail to get the new Pokemon. I can't imagine there weren't at least a few cartridges that got jacked up in shipping. One of the really interesting early events was a contest where Koro magazine readers sent in ideas for Pokemon 2, which later became Pokemon Gold and Silver versions, and the best ones would be selected by series creator Satoshi Tajiri and series producer Tsunekazu Ishihara. The people who sent in the best ideas would win a surfing Pikachu. Of course, I can't talk about video game updates without talking about Sonic and Knuckles. Sonic the Hedgehog 3
I don't know
was
anything about
originally
Sonic.
going to be one game, but because of a deal Sega had with McDonald's, they wanted to get a game out by the time the Happy Meal promotion went live. So, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was split into two parts. Part A, called Sonic 3, and Part B, called Sonic and Knuckles, both released in 1994. Sonic and Knuckles was a special Sega Genesis cartridge that could lock on to other
Is that the rest
cartridges,
of the video?
adding new
Okay.
content to those games. If you connected Sonic and Knuckles to Sonic 3, you got the full Sonic the Hedgehog 3 package, called Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Connecting the game to Sonic 2 gave you the ability to play as Knuckles in Sonic 2.
Sounds
Connecting
pretty cool.
the game to Sonic 1 gave you the greatest Sonic game of all time, Blue Sphere. Connecting
You
it
didn't
to
talk
just
about
about
Donkey
any
Kong
other
or
Genesis
Banjo,
game
though.
gave you only one single level of Blue Sphere, which was determined by the data in the game's ROM header, which is basically where general information
My day's been going okay.